first question is there evidence? No, what are you doing? Is there evidence to suggest the paleo diet reverses heart disease? What about the paleo-Vedic diet?
Okay. Yes. So in terms of the studies on the paleo diet, can you hear me? No.
Got it.
Okay. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. All right. So in terms of the studies on the paleo diet, I think we're still very early on in terms of comparing the paleo diet to other diets. But what little research there has been done, it's very favorable in terms of the effect on blood sugar, the effect on weight, the effect on cholesterol. So I think more research is needed in terms of heart disease, but all these other parameters are related, and since they're improving, I think they're, it's pointing in the right direction.
Any other perspectives on the paleo diet and heart disease? A follow-up question to that is, what is the effect on LDL and HDL cholesterol with the paleo diet?
Okay. I think what happens when when we stop eating, especially processed flours and sugars, breads, crackers, pasta, that kind of stuff, is that triglycerides markedly come down. And there was research done at UCSF a few years ago they brought people into the hospital to do a feeding study, because for many years we just thought that LDL cholesterol was raised by eating animal food, by eating saturated fat. They brought a group of people into the hospital and kept them there for 2 weeks and fed them either very high sugar diets or lower carbohydrate diets, and there was a marked increase in LDL cholesterol in people who were eating the sugars and the flours and stuff. So that was really, my memory was really the first study that was done looking at that. So again, I think the ship is starting to reverse in terms of what we should be doing with carbohydrates versus healthy animal foods. And when we say healthy, if an animal is grass-fed, it's eating grass. Grass is it's a pre-omega-3 fat, and the grass is converted into EPA, DHA, which is the essential fatty acids, just like we find in fish. So if we're eating animals like that, their content, their flesh content is higher in those protective fatty acids. So it's not just licensed to eat any animal food that you want. It's really trying to choose the healthiest animal foods and plant foods while limiting the processed stuff.
A lot of times when people go paleo, if they have their blood tested day 0 and then again after 30 days or even 60 days, sometimes they see an elevation in markers that they don't want to see an elevation in, any cholesterol, total cholesterol, anything. But what happens is we need to normalize our metabolism. So if you're currently losing weight, having those markers tested may or may not be that indicative of what would be normal for you, because your body is still in a place where it's processing a lot of different things. So information from Chris Masterjohn on cholesterol research. He's somebody who I think has some of the best cutting edge information on cholesterol research. He talks about really being weight normalized, weight stable for a minimum of a month before you go to have your cholesterol tested. And also if something comes back looking a little bit wonky or funny, the standard deviation and what might be reported is about 17 points. So you might see something today or tomorrow, and it could be a difference between being recommended a statin or not. And so, he always recommends if this is a concern, have it tested multiple times to see what's going on. And of course, the test always has to be fasted. But we see this happening a lot when people go paleo for 30 days and then they get a blood test and they expect magic. But again, you can't expect your body in 30 days to change every metabolic function to be completely optimal after 30 to 50 years or more of insulting it with refined foods, seed oils, all of that stuff. So that's something that we see. And the other thing is that eating saturated fat can raise your HDL cholesterol, which most people know as the good cholesterol. So it wouldn't be surprising that including egg yolks and coconut oil in your diet, you might see a raise in your total cholesterol, but you would have to make sure that you're looking at what's actually going up. And if that HDL is what's going up, then it's something to not only be less concerned about potentially, but understand that that's an expected result when you increase healthy forms of saturated fat like egg yolks, like coconut oil. So just so you know what to expect.
Thanks. Next question. What is your view on using healthy stool transplants to inoculate the gut?
Well, it's an active area of research, and there are people who have been treated and healed or cured of certain things like C. difficile colitis, which is a terrible infection of the gut that can happen when we take certain antibiotics, especially clindamycin. I had a patient who died of it a couple years ago. And so when fecal or stool transplants are done, the success rate is very, very high. That said, don't go home and try this yourself. I know I have read reports of problems with it, there's some concerns, because again, we're just starting to understand what's in the gut. And if you do a stool collection, you do a stool test, and we're starting to identify the DNA of the species that are there, but we also don't know what is attached to the colon, to the mucosa, along which is probably important as well. There's a lot that we don't understand. And I know there have been some concerns about increasing risk of inflammation and autoimmune disease when these stool transplants have been done. So it's an emerging field. I think it's very exciting. I think it's something we'll be using in the future, but it's still experimental.
Yeah, and I would add that the thing that we know for sure does have a huge effect on the microbiome is your diet, and specifically eating as many different kinds of fiber, different kinds of vegetables that you may not normally eat, because every food does feed a different set of species of bacteria in the gut. So if you don't ever eat artichokes, it might be good to incorporate artichokes once in a while. Or if you're eating the same thing every day, the same vegetable, the same food, that's also not good. So variety, different kinds of fiber, that is guaranteed to have a positive impact on the microbiome, and that's something that's that you can do that we know works right now.
Thank you. Why no legumes or whole grains on the paleo diet?
Just answered this one for a gentleman who I think he stepped out. So as Dr. Hill was talking about, the defense mechanisms in all living things are existent. So we have, as animals, we can run away or we can fight, right? That's fight or flight. But plants have defense mechanisms too. So some plants have thorns and barbs and we can't really get to them that way, and some have thick skins. But some plants have defense mechanisms just built into that bran and the endosperm of, for example, a whole grain. Same thing with a legume. If you picture a nut, a walnut has a really great defense mechanism. You have to crack a shell to get in there. Eggs even have defense mechanisms. Not only the shell, but also the white of the egg has a lot of anti-nutrients, which is one of the reasons why we always say to cook it. So soaking, sprouting, and fermenting things like grains and legumes does help to reduce the anti-nutrient properties of them. So some people do find that over time, after healing their gut and soaking, sprouting, and fermenting grains and legumes, they can tolerate them a lot better. There are just a lot of reasons why they may be problematic for people. Anti-nutrients are one. What you were talking about with SIBO or SIMO, that was the new thing I learned tonight. If you have an overgrowth of bacteria in the wrong part of your gut, then eating these highly fermentable carbohydrates is going to be very, very irritating to you. And so for most people, it's an easy thing to remove from your diet. It allows you to replace most of what's on your plate with vegetables. It also gets you to avoid processed and refined foods very, very easily, because you look at something and you know that it's made from grains and you just don't eat it. And it becomes really easy to avoid those foods when they're just a category that you're not eating. But they do become more gray area over time. It's just a lot of people like to have this broad sweeping, well, paleo men or cavemen didn't eat it. And it's really more about how does it affect our bodies today. And our bodies today are actually not very well prepared to handle a lot of different foods until we do some work to kind of repair things, eat a lot more nutrient-dense foods, and then try them out and see what's going on, and not eat them in the forms of things like, you know, Wonder Bread and all of the refined things we ate for many, many years, but obviously getting them in much better forms.
What are the advantages of an animal-based diet versus a vegetarian or vegan diet for the microbiome?
I am not a fan of vegan diets. If any of you have attended any of the Weston Price Foundation meetings or looked at any of the Weston Price information, it's really informative. And he was a dentist who lived in the 1900s and went around the world to almost every continent and studied cultures, villages that were untouched by human commerce. And he started doing this because he started seeing a lot of people in his dental practice with more dental caries and with deformities in their face and their teeth and crowding, issues with their vision. So he went around the world and he got people to allow him to come in and study them. And so he studied their dental health, he photographed them, he looked at their vision, their health, their mental health. No issues with depression in these cultures. There were no issues with acne. There were no chronic diseases that we have now. And then he took their sacred foods and he brought them back to his lab in Illinois. And he was head of research for the American Dental Society. And what he found was that, number one, all cultures ate animal foods when they could get hold of it. And you know, some hunted, some foraged. You know, some lived in extreme conditions and had only limited amounts of foods, but all cultures ate animal food when they could get it. And their sacred foods were usually organ meats and eggs. And he found, and this was in the 1930s and 40s, that people were getting, at that time, 10 times as many fat-soluble nutrients as his patients were getting in the United States. So imagine what it is today, right? This was in the 1930s and 40s. So animal foods are the only source of fat-soluble nutrients like preformed vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K. We can get the precursors to that in plant food, but not everyone can convert, for example, beta-carotene into vitamin A. Vitamin A is really important for your immune system, for your vision, for your teeth. So I test people when they come in. Zinc is another great example. The richest source of zinc on the planet is oysters. It's found in very small amounts in other foods. And I see a lot of people with zinc deficiencies, with vitamin A deficiencies. Those are important for cancer prevention, for cognition. So, so I have some concern about vegan diets, and I test people when they come in. I don't think it's I don't think it's the diet that humans were meant to eat, but you know, try to support someone if they have patients who refuse to eat any animal food. But you were talking about plants being alive. Plants are alive just as much as animals are alive. And I don't know, it's a little bit of a funny distinction for me to say, well, we'll kill a plant and eat that, but not an animal. So I wonder sometimes if we're making the wrong distinction in terms of choosing the best foods for our health.
And I would just add, from the perspective of Ayurveda, that it is individualized based on your body type. So Ayurveda does believe that certain people could do okay being vegetarian if they're careful about, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, but it's not for everybody. And the idea is that, one diet does not fit all. So it really should be customized, and using your experience and also looking at your body type can be helpful for that.
Please discuss some of the vitamins lacking in the paleo diet and how we can replace them. Or are there any vitamins lacking?
Well, it really depends on what you eat when you go paleo. I think when you eat any diet, there's going to be something that could be lacking, but it's hard to find certain nutrients in our foods, and fat-soluble vitamins are actually one that are category that are pretty tricky to find. Vitamin A is most abundant in liver. This is something that within the meal plans of Practical Paleo, I tell people for each different type of health condition or group of health conditions, supportive nutrients, and then foods that contain them. I can't remember if I listed them in alphabetical order within each or if it was by which was the most abundant. But when you were talking about zinc, I was like, I know she's going to say oysters. And then pumpkin seeds, way down on the list. There are nutrients that are going to be deficient from any type of diet. I think probably the biggest one that people think about with paleo is calcium. And I can very easily tell you how to start getting more calcium in your diet if you don't want to eat dairy, you find that you can't tolerate it. Sardines with the bones. But of course, most people have this kind of reaction. We have a good mix of a crowd here. Not everybody's under 30, which the under 30 crowds that I tend to talk to often, or even under 40, sardines and liver are just not on the table. But we're bringing them back almost every week on our podcast. We talk about foods that people don't want to hear about, but we want people to be encouraged to eat those traditional foods, as you were saying, foods that the Weston A. Price Foundation talks about pretty often. But that's probably the biggest one, would be calcium, and everything else, there's really nothing different about eating paleo that you can't get those nutrients, or that you would be getting them in some other diet. Perhaps B vitamins are something to pay a little bit more attention to. Liver is also a great source of B vitamins, so we could just, look, you guys, you can get liver supplements if you don't want to eat liver. I have a liver pate recipe in Practical Paleo. I'm lucky that I did grow up eating liver, so while I didn't eat it for about 20 years, I was able to start eating it again because it had a familiar, yummy taste to me. But you can find desiccated liver in capsule form, and it's better than nothing. There are a lot of brands selling it now.
I just want to say, Dr. Weil always used to say to us, get a can of sardines and mix it with Dijon mustard. And you know, that didn't sound too good. But anyway, I finally tried it, and I turned around, and it was gone, because my husband ate the entire thing. I was like, dude, where's my food? Anyway, it's delicious. There are, so you'd be surprised if you're willing to try and experiment with things. I throw sardines in my salads. There are creative ways to get, and just keep in mind that, you know, for most of human existence, what we lived on was a paleo kind of diet. People in most of the rest of the world do not drink milk after weaning. We do in the United States because the dairy industry is such a powerful industry. People would use small amounts of dairy products, fermented, cheese, that kind of thing, but not eat dairy the way we do in the US. So anyway, people did not eat a lot of grains and legumes and dairy many years ago, and they did just fine.
And the final big question, which fruits are the highest in nutrient value?
So I guess I should come back to apples, since I did cover that in my presentation. But in general, you know, the rules that I was talking about in terms of the smaller is more nutrient dense do apply to apples. So the closest to wild apples are actually crab apples, which are sometimes you can find them in farmers markets, and you can incorporate them in, you know, pies or desserts, dishes like that. So in terms of apples, I would say that you know, crab apples are a good option. The Granny Smith apple is actually much more nutritious than, you know, comparable red apples. Yeah, so in my book I have a whole chapter about fruits. You know, for example, mangoes are a very rich source of vitamin C and you know, other carotenoids and antioxidants, and not eaten very widely in the US. Same with papaya. It's another tropical fruit that's very nutrient dense. Maybe if you guys have any of your favorite fruit to add, you could add them, but those are some of the ones that come to mind.
Are any of you familiar with Michael Greger? He does a blog and column called Nutrition Facts, nutritionfacts.org. He and his team of people analyze 10,000 studies a month on nutrition. So anyway, he presented some data in a study that was done, and this was in the lab, but looking at which fruits and vegetables stopped cancer, the growth of cancer cells in the lab. And anybody guess what the number one fruit was? Well, I'll just say cranberries. So cranberries, lemons, strawberries, apples, and red grapes. So, you know, I'll encourage people, I hand out my smoothie recipes all the time, throw the whole lemon, the entire lemon, the rind, everything into your smoothie. Throw frozen cranberries in. And then in terms of the vegetables, the highest, anybody know what the highest vegetable? Garlic. Garlic, onions, dark green leafy vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables, so those are the highest. So it's what I try to encourage people, especially if I'm working with someone who has cancer.
I'm just going to say this one more time too. So part of what I studied in holistic nutrition was looking at specific nutrients, foods where you can get those nutrients, obviously supplements as well, herbs and all different forms of potent phytochemicals. So that's one of the things that I did in Practical Paleo, and you can look through it at most libraries too. Y'all don't need to buy the book, borrow it from a friend, somebody you know probably has it. Flip through it and you can see if you're dealing with a specific health condition or you have a friend or family member who is, the meal plans are not created like, oh, you just feel like eating these foods this week. They're created to also point out if you're struggling with these different issues, these are the nutrients that you should be focusing on. As much as the meal plan may have recipes that are from the book, so they're not all over the board. It's not 4 different liver dishes. It's not wild and out there. It's really more about reading what will work for you so that beyond whatever recipes might be in there for 30 days, which that 30 days is only meant to just get you on board. If there are these other nutrients that you need to be focusing on, it doesn't obviously mean the rest aren't important, but in certain health conditions, we know that certain nutrients, as you were saying with fighting cancer, are more supportive than others, and so that there is a plan for, it's called cancer recovery in the book. I don't ever want to put something that somebody might assume is going to cure cancer in a nutrition book, but just so you guys know, that's really what the whole purpose of the meal plans is, to be therapeutic and to offer some support when you leave a doctor's office with a diagnosis and a now what. Because there may be 3 health conditions, maybe not as much here with the integrative medicine, obviously, but most situations you're left with a 1-pager on things to avoid and things to eat, and how often are they not even realistic. And this is really going to walk people through and really hold their hand a lot more on how to live every day.
Oh, Siri wants to. Oh, she recorded.
Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time and attention and your support.